Hi again, everyone. This is Jerry Serino from the Median Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here, as always. Please go to all of our social media and Cleveland Right to Life, as well as fromthemedian.org, where you can connect with us and see all sorts of episodes. And then would definitely appreciate subscribing on any podcast app as well. It helps, and we want to get the word out there because we are working hard at saving and protecting life. And speaking of saving and protecting life, I have a great guest today. Victor Nieves is here. He is the president of Life Issues Institute, and he's here to tell us all about himself and his organization. Victor, thanks for coming on.
Well, Jerry, thank you so much for having me.
So first and foremost, we'll talk about Life Issues Institute and where people can find it and connect. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Kind of depends how far you want to go back, but I've been fighting for life. I am young. I'm 26, coming up on 27. I don't know how that exactly happened. It seems like it's going quicker and quicker by the day. But I've been involved in the fight for pretty much as long as I've been alive. I had a unique blessing growing up. My family was involved in local politics. So I was asking those questions. I just gave a speech the other day, and I was kind of reflecting on this and laughing about it a little bit. But part of that unique upbringing that I had and the unique blessing, I mean, I was like 10 or 12 years old in the car with my dad, and I was asking him questions about life, and I was asking the hard questions, the hardball stuff. Well, what about cases of rape? What about cases of incest? What about this and that? And I had a great blessing because my father had the answers. He had already thought through this. He was well versed on, pro-life apologetics and things like that. And so we were always very plugged in. We were very involved. I grew up with weird tan lines on my neck and around my arms, from wearing a T-shirt out knocking doors and stuff like that.
Okay.
And I put in my shoe leather, at a very
Yeah.
young age, knocking doors, working campaigns. Got involved in the local grassroots movement in Missouri. Had a great time. I've always been a Missouri boy, born and raised. I live in Texas these days, but I was kind of in the St. Louis area, and then I started posting on social media. I was making a lot of pro-life content, just general commentary. That opened some interesting doors. I ended up a radio host in St. Louis on a big 50,000 watt station. It was awesome, a great opportunity. I was drive time 4 to 6 every day. Did it for a couple of years, and then I ended up moving to Texas, but got open some very exciting doors. I ended up coming on with Life Issues Institute. Now I do radio through them and podcasting, and we'll get to talking about that a little bit later. But yeah, it's been a wild ride. God has opened doors in my life that I certainly didn't anticipate and could not have opened myself. I wrote a book. I forget all of the stuff
Yeah.
over the years. It's been a fun time though.
Yeah, excellent stuff. When you said that you would ask your dad the hard questions, about rape and things like that. Where were you hearing that at a younger age? Were you hearing that from friends at school? Was it just stuff that you came up with and thought about?
Yeah, it's a good question. Honestly, I don't know for sure, but I would suspect the latter. I would suspect it's something that I just came up with. I've always been kind of weird in this regard. I'm somebody who I've always. I mean, I remember asking the same hard questions about my Christian faith when I was very young. I
Hmm.
would anything that I believed. I didn't want to just have this idea in my head. I wanted to know why, and particularly I wanted to know, what do I say when someone challenges this? When somebody comes to me and they're like, well, Victor, you're only pro-life because you grew up in a pro-life family. I didn't want that to be true of me. And so I was always thinking about this. Well, what about, it's like, I used to box, right? And so in boxing, you shadow box. And one of the
Hmm.
things you're supposed to do is you're supposed to visualize, what would my opponent do? I'm not just in here for fun. There's somebody else throwing back at me. And so no matter what belief you hold to, you should always be doing that. You should always be shadow boxing yourself. Or if it's a game of chess, right, you play against yourself. You think, what am I doing wrong? What are the holes in my game? What's the error? And so I had a great blessing in that. I was just weird, really. I think I was just weird. I don't think anybody was asking me as a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old, well, Victor, what about cases of rape?
Yeah.
But I'm sure I had heard, watching the news and stuff, you hear about these crazy stories. And so I just started asking the questions.
Yeah. No, they're good questions, and they prepare you because that's what the other side comes immediately after, is those exceptions, which I understand why they're doing that. But none of them would say, well, I would support banning abortion except for the exceptions, right? They wouldn't even stand for that. So I hate when they bring it up. So tell me then about Life Issues Institute.
Yeah, well, again, it's one of these blessings. I have a great opportunity standing on the shoulders of giants. Life Issues Institute was founded way back in 1991 by a man who is truly a legend of the pro-life movement, Dr. Wilkie, and I mean he was really a pioneer. So for years we have been at the tip of the spear on the educational side. Dr. Wilkie, I actually have it on a shelf behind me. He wrote a very famous, very influential book titled Abortion Questions and Answers. And it was one of the revolutionary pieces of literature because it equipped people with exactly that, the answers to the questions that you are going to face. I oftentimes reference it, but there's a famous quote by Abe Lincoln. He said, if somebody gave me 6 hours to chop down a tree, I would spend the first 4 sharpening my axe. And so I like to think of the work that we do as sharpening that axe. We have what is essentially, as you know, Jerry, about a 50-50 split in the United States on the issue of abortion. It ebbs and flows, but, for all intents and purposes, if we have our half of this battle show up well sharpened, show up well versed, well equipped for the battle, we will win. And it'll take a 50-50 issue and it'll make it a 60-40 issue, a 70-30, 80-20 until eventually abortion is truly unthinkable. And so there's legislative efforts in the pro-life movement that are extremely important. There are culture, but the education is really, if you think of like a three-legged stool, you need all of these different approaches. We really focus on the education, equipping people, tools, resources, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it is so important. I want to get your perspective on, the whole 50-50 thing. And I agree. I think that deep down, we're basically split, what exactly it is. But I'm in Ohio. Here in Ohio, a year or so ago, we had a constitutional amendment that was passed by direct vote from the people, and it enshrined abortion in our Constitution. Very sad. Ohio is a relatively conservative state. It's overall it's pretty conservative, and yet people in this state obviously voted to put it in the Constitution. What do you think, even in a conservative state or area, people seem to prefer to keep abortion?
Yeah, and it's a tricky question to answer, unfortunately. And I wish I had a very concrete answer. First and foremost, and I think most obvious, is anytime you see legislation like what the amendment which passed, unfortunately, heartbreakingly in Ohio, it's
Hmm.
always passed on a bed of lies. They never come out. They didn't come, as you're well aware, in Ohio. They didn't come to the electorate in Ohio and tell the truth. They did the exact opposite. So I would say some of those votes are not an accurate representation of
Yeah.
the will of the people because they did not know. And that's a failure more so on the pro life side. It's also an indictment of the adversary who is literally lying. But part of our
Hmm.
job, yes, is to correct some of those lies. If the people of Ohio truly knew the bill of goods that they were buying when they did that, I don't think it would have passed. So that's one of those factors in it. There's a lot of propaganda, there's a lot of lies, there's a lot of emotion. And the other side, we don't have to like them. I certainly am not appreciative of those who are trying to kill more babies, but we can admire certain of their attributes. They fight hard, man. I tell you what, that is
Hmm.
one thing that you have to give credit where credit is due. And it's also a bit of a spur for us to remember if they're fighting this hard, if they're this active, how active do we need to be, right? If we let our foot off the gas for 10 seconds, they're going to take that opportunity and they're going to run with it. But I think that's what we're seeing. I really do, because Ohio should not be Missouri. I mean, I'm a
Hmm.
Missouri guy. Missouri passed, I believe it was titled Amendment 3 in Missouri, which swung Missouri from a deeply pro life state. It was the first state in the country to officially enact its trigger laws following Dobbs. And now it's, to my understanding, basically the first real strong pro life state, which has now flipped into the other direction. Abortion horrifically is legal in Missouri, and again, that was done. I would say it was carried in on a pretty strong bed of lies.
How do you think that these lies continue? I mean, there have been so many, and to me, it at some point we have to ask people that are being fooled by these lies to say, are you really being fooled, or are you using them as an excuse? Right? I mean, everyone knows that it's not a clump of cells,
Yeah,
but that still is put forward, right?
yeah.
do you think that there's something beyond just people being lied, believing the lies?
Absolutely. I don't know if you've seen it, Jerry. It's a very famous movie titled Shutter Island. Have you ever seen Shutter Island? I don't know that I
I've
can
heard of
recommend
it,
it. Yeah,
and
as I
I've
say, I don't know. It's got some themes and stuff in it that I don't necessarily recommend it, but it was an interesting movie. One of the final quotes, I just bring it up because one of the final quotes of the movie, and I'll probably mess it up here, but the main character played by Leonardo DiCaprio, he asks a question and he says, "Is it better to live a monster or to die a good man?" And the struggle that he's facing is
mhm,
he doesn't want to come to grips with what he's done. And so he would rather live in a delusion. He would rather die, in fact, than have to live with the truth of what he has actually done. And I don't want to spoil that movie for anyone, who wants to watch it, but we're facing a very similar dilemma when it comes to abortion. You look at the number of people who have been impacted by abortion, men who paid for it, men who told their girlfriend, "You need to go get this abortion," women who went and got the abortionists. This is something that touches basically every other person in our country, by proxy at least. At least you know someone. And so we have that as a compounding issue. I speak with students sometimes, apologetics and defending the pro-life position. What do we do when we're faced with somebody who it seems irrational? It seems like they can't just have a normal conversation. They get very mad very quickly. They
mhm,
get irate, in fact. And I always remind them, I say, you're probably dealing with somebody who has been directly impacted by abortion, whether they had it themselves or if it's a guy, maybe he had a girlfriend. And that is something that will sit very heavy on their heart for the rest of their life because they're facing that exact question. Do I live as a monster or see myself as, I mean, you're talking about killing your own child. We can't sell short the significance of grappling with that reality. If you're somebody who has done that, now I would say that there is a path to healing through Jesus Christ and there is forgiveness. And of course, this is all true. But in order to accept reality, you have to accept all of reality. And that includes if abortion is wrong and you have abortion in your past, that means that you did participate in killing your own child. And that's, I
mhm.
can understand why that's hard for people, to come to grips with.
Yeah, it's someone said, defending it is sometimes the only thing that allows, right? They don't want to admit that what they did, so they're trying to justify it. And I get it. You're right. There is a lot of pain and hurt in that, and you got to be sensitive. So how would you, suggest, that? So, whether you're sitting next to someone on a plane and they say, "Hey, I'm, Victor, nice to meet you. So what do you do?" And and you say what you do, and they go, "Oh, no way, I'm pro-abortion, I'm pro-choice." How do you engage with someone in that situation?
Well, in that case, hopefully they're a reasonable person. If I'm on a plane, I might handle it lightly because I'm stuck with this person for the
Yeah,
next couple
for a
hours. But if
while.
if it's somebody who's actually wanting to have the conversation, typically I'll just ask questions. People, for one, you're an active listener. It's not off-putting. It's not offensive. You have to handle it correctly. Every situation is different. So what I'm describing is not like a knives out debate on a
Hmm.
stage with somebody, but just a real life, good faith conversation. I would just how come? Tell me about it. What do you think of the unborn? Do you think it's a human being? Do you think it's not a human being? And just ask those questions. Pull the thread until eventually
Hmm.
the whole thing, starts to fall apart. If you're wanting to present really the foundation of the pro-life position, we have resources, available on our website, lifeissues.org, to kind of help you to do that. I like to point out just a couple of biological facts. I think that this is well received by most people because it's not philosophy. It's not subjective. It's not up for interpretation, really. But there's just a couple of truth claims. So, from the moment of fertilization forward, we know that there are three things, at least three things, that are absolutely always true of a human baby if we're talking about abortion, if we're in the conversation of abortion, right? The morality of it. The first is that it is alive. That's pretty important, right? If the unborn baby is alive, that's a relevant factor. This is simple. It's
Hmm.
science, it's embryology, it's living, growing, and it's replacing its own cells. So that's a very easy, we can all understand it. We know it when we see it, sort of a thing. It's also human. That's an important detail. Every
Yeah.
strand of DNA in the body of that child it belongs to the species Homo sapiens. But if you're dealing with somebody clever, those two pieces of the puzzle, that's actually not enough. Something can be human and all of the DNA in its cells can, also it can be alive, human, all of that, but that could be a cancer cell. So when you're dealing with these people, technically, yes, cancer cells are alive. Technically, yes, the DNA belongs to the species Homo sapiens. The big thing that puts it all together, the third scientific fact I like to bring up, is very simply that it's a distinct organism. So this is not the mother. It is not the father. It's not a skin cell. It's not a reproductive cell. It's not a gamete. It is a whole and complete organism. It's not a part of, it is a whole. It's not a piece of some other organism. It is in and of itself its own organism. And that can all seem a little scientific and confusing for people, but that checklist of those three things, well, we do that. That's how we determine what a human being is all the time. You go into Walmart, you know how you can tell the difference between the watermelon on the shelf and the person standing next to you? It's because you know that person, well, they check those three boxes. Never in nature, I mean, maybe somebody can prove me wrong, never do we see anything on planet Earth that checks those three boxes that is not a human being deserving of the right to life. And so there's a million ways to skin this cat.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different ways to approach it. But good faith conversations, and I like to ask a lot of questions because it's kind of cheating. It's kind of inside baseball in a way. But if you're responding, you're losing. It's like one of the golden rules of politics. It's one of the golden rules of basically everything. Be the one to ask the question. That's my advice. Be the one to ask the questions. But be good faith. Be nice about it. And you plant some seeds. You never know.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's great advice. It's really good advice. I'd love to give you throw out to you some of the objections we kind of mentioned in the very beginning, such as the exceptions. So let's maybe start and just obviously you're not going to necessarily ask me the questions like you would, but if you get to the point of explaining things, what you would say. So let's take the situation of what about that young girl in Ohio, it happened, who was raped
Yeah.
by an illegal immigrant, and she ended up going to Indiana for an abortion. So, what about that young girl?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a big question about rape. At the core of it, it is a question of rape, and so we can understand as people with hearts how difficult that is. And I often extend this olive branch to people when we're having a good faith conversation and say, "Listen, I get it. If there was going to be an exception, you would understand why your heart would go out and why this might be it." I oftentimes will paint the picture, though. So to somebody who's bringing up that case, I'll say, all right, it's very topical right now, the Epstein situation. Everybody knows how horrible that is. Everybody, the people who abused those children, let's say tomorrow the Department of Justice makes an announcement and they got him, right? The worst guy on the list, the most prolific, evil, horrible human being in modern history that we can even think of. We take him to court, he is tried, and he is convicted. But when it comes time to sentence that man, the judge says, wait, stop. Somebody go get his daughter. We're going to sentence his daughter to death for his crimes. And so that's what we have to keep in mind. No one would ever say that's just. That would be appalling. There would be riots across the country if the DOJ tried to do that, if they said we're going to kill his daughter, because she did nothing wrong. When a grave moral injustice is committed, the answer is never to punish an innocent child. So in all cases, even when it's difficult, even when our emotions get involved, in all cases, we have to go back to that fundamental question that kind of undergirds the entire debate on abortion, which is, what is that unborn baby? Is that unborn baby just a immoral, nothingness? Is it a clump of cells? Is it the product of conception? Or is it a human being? If it is an innocent human being with a right to life, the circumstances of his or her conception don't devalue his or her life. You don't lose your right to life, your most fundamental right. You don't lose it because of what your dad did. So we need to come around people who are in those terrible circumstances. I mean, we could take it to the most dramatic hypothetical we could ever think of. It could be somebody who has a traumatic brain injury, is a quadriplegic, who has all sorts of diagnoses, and then they end up in this situation. That is horrible. But it really doesn't change the value of the life inside them. There's another human being at question here. And the answer to the evils that we see in the world is not to commit more evil against innocent children.
Yeah, that's a great example. Actually, I hadn't really thought of it like that or to explain it. So that's excellent. Thank you for that. The next one is Come on, Victor. Here you are. You and me. We're both guys. We have no say in this matter, man.
Yeah, we deal with that all the time, and it's one of the funny. I hate to say it's funny, but it just doesn't make sense. If we think about this logically, it just doesn't make sense. Abortion is a moral question. There is no world where a moral question requires some sort of a anatomical prerequisite. Do I have to, and not to be crude, do I have to check my pants? I mean, anytime I'm
Right.
going to offer my input on a moral issue, do I need to go to a biology class and check some kind of a box? I thought, now correct me if I'm wrong, I thought that as a society we were kind of moving past this idea that we would segregate everybody out and you get an opinion on this and you get an opinion on that. But also, I mean, let's just face head on the logic of that claim. If something doesn't affect you, directly affect you, I'm never going to get pregnant, no matter what anybody tries to tell me. A man will never get pregnant. It will never affect me directly. That doesn't matter. You know why it doesn't matter? Well, because there's all sorts of atrocities that have never and will never affect me. I have never been human trafficked. Lord willing, I will never be human trafficked. I was never, sold into chattel slavery. Lord willing, I will never be sold into chattel slavery. But there are those in the world who are in those conditions right now. Even though it doesn't affect me, I speak out for them. Because good people speak out for those who cannot speak out for themselves. We study history as kids, right? And we all remember probably the first time in like fourth grade when we learned about slavery or we learned about the Holocaust, or because you don't get the real history till you're a little bit older.
Yeah.
But when you do hear that history, you think to yourself, at least I did, boy, if I would have been around in 1937 when Hitler was rising to power, or if I would have been around in the 1800s when the debate about chattel slavery was really heating up, I would have been one of the good guys. Probably. You probably would have been one of the good guys. You got a chance to prove it right now. Just like a lot of the Northerners didn't have any, they didn't own slaves. They had no business, right? Were we going to tell them, well, you're not allowed to have a moral say on something just because it doesn't affect you? Bogus. That is absolutely bogus. And a cherry on top. I mean, it's a very dark, admittedly, cherry on top. 65 million abortions since 1973. Approximately half of the unborn were males. I think you can make a good argument for a collected vested interest of men when, what is the math there, 32.5 million men have been killed?
Right.
I think we get to have a say.
Yeah, we definitely do. We definitely do. Especially, yeah, the child there is much the man's as it is the woman's, which is would lead me to my last point, and that is it's her body. Stay out of it.
Yeah, that's one of the most common, and it depends the depth that they are prepared to take this argument, because it can be as shallow as, well, my body, my choice. It can be as deep as a very philosophical claim to an absolute right of bodily autonomy. And so regardless which one of those you face, again, we have refutations for all of this on the website. The idea of bodily autonomy being absolute, in order to refute it, you just take it to its logical conclusion. You don't misrepresent it. You don't strawman their position. At its core, and no one who's making this argument would disagree with me, I'm not misrepresenting it, at its core, bodily autonomy as an argument says I have the absolute right to decide what I do with my body and my resources. You may be a human being. In fact, the bodily autonomy crowd will actually concede that the baby in the womb is a human being with a right to life. They'll just say it does not supersede the woman's bodily autonomy. They'll say that the bodily autonomy supersedes the child's right to life, and that they have this absolute right to decide what happens with their body, with their resources, etc. And at any point, they can just claim this right, and they can cut off their resources. They can say, I'm no longer going to supply anything to that child. I hear this all the time. Very common on college campuses for this argument to be presented, because at its core, bodily autonomy is actually a good thing. Most of us don't want to be told what to do with our body. We reserve the right to make our own decisions free of force or coercion, that kind of stuff. But it's not absolute. Something can be good, but not absolute. So taking it out to its logical conclusion, that would mean that a mother could allow her children to starve and just claim bodily autonomy. There's a hypothetical that's common. Let's suppose that there's a pregnant mother who lives in, the northern states, and there's a blizzard. And before her due day, a blizzard snows her in, and she's stuck for a month. It's just her. She delivers her child naturally, and she has the ability to breastfeed. The baby is outside of her. We're not talking about an abortion anymore. We're talking about a born child outside of the mother. But bodily autonomy is absolute. She has the right to do with her body as she pleases. She has no obligation, they would say, to use her body to sustain the life of another. Should that woman, with her newborn baby, should she be allowed to refuse to feed her child and allow it to starve to death? Yes or no? And if you really take the position that it's my body, my choice, you got to be okay with letting that baby starve. That's not a position that most people are willing to agree to. Some folks will die on a crazy hill there and say, yes, parents can let their kids starve, but oh my goodness, do we see the conclusion of this
Yeah.
pro abortion philosophy? You're talking about parents letting their children starve. That
Yeah.
is crazy.
Well, I think there's going to be there's a lot of people on that side who would be okay with that. They're the same people who would disagree with you when you said that men can't get pregnant,
Yeah.
right? There's plenty out there, so I wouldn't put anything past them. Well, Victor Nieves, really great talking to you. The time flew by. I'm looking at the clock, going, "Oh my God." I'm going to have to cut out some of my blabber to keep in your stuff and the time frame we have here. So Victor Nieves, lifeissues.org. Please go to lifeissues.org, connect, engage, and support in any way you can. Victor, man, thanks for all that you're doing. Really appreciate it. You are a great speaker. So anyone looking for a speaker, he's your guy. Victor Nieves, thank you for being here.
Jerry, thank you so much for having me and for the kind words.
Yes, my pleasure. And thank all of you for listening to this episode of From the Median Podcast. We will see you next time.